After my wife suddenly passed away, our estranged son showed up at her funeral after 6 years, not to mourn, but to claim his inheritance. I pretty much fell in love with my wife when we first met in high school, and once we both graduated from college, we made the decision to be married and create a family. She made the decision to stay at home with her family, allowing me to concentrate on working and growing the company my father had founded. His company was an advertising agency, and the idea had always been for me to take over and learn the ropes after I finished college, prior to his retirement. Since my wife and I both majored in business, I did talk to her before deciding on anything, and she didn't really mind staying at home and taking care of the household either. Even when we were in college, we liked the idea that we would be able to raise our son in the same way, and we knew that we were equals and that each of our jobs was important in and of itself. However, it was evident that there was a problem with our parenting because our son did not acquire the same values that we had intended. When he was a high school student, things first started to go wrong, and we would frequently receive stories about our son becoming a complete bully. Furthermore, it seems that he had been hanging around with youngsters who found it cool to go outside and smoke during school hours rather than attending class. Though he had never been a particularly gifted student, our son had at least been honorable and well-behaved until middle school. I'm not even sure what went wrong after that, though all I know is that one day he was a sincere and obedient child, and the next he was a rule-breaking bully. I've attempted to discipline him multiple times with my wife, and we've even threatened to throw him out, but it's never worked. The trouble was that he seemed to know it too, which is why he never took it seriously. We knew we would never be able to accomplish that, so we persisted in asking him to perform better and generally be a better person, but he ignored us and carried on with his behavior as he saw fit. As parents, it was really depressing, and we started to feel pretty powerless. He also informed us that he would not be attending college after high school since he felt it would be a waste of time and that he wanted to begin working right away. He said that he had been lying to us and hadn't even been applying. I truly lost my mind in the few months before his high school graduation because I was in no way prepared to accept the fact that my kid would not be attending college. He didn't seem to care that my wife and I were shouting at him a lot since we were so angry with him. Since the harm had already been done and his scores were so bad to begin with, I doubt that any respectable college would have admitted him. It was really rather meaningless. I therefore made the decision to let him know that if he so desired, he might work and take a gap year. However, he had to pay rent in order to continue living with us. He made an attempt to argue with me about it, but since he was 18 and I owed him nothing, I was free to legally toss him out of my house. In normal conditions, I doubt I would have done that. However, given the way my kid had been acting in the years prior, I found it really difficult to just let him get his way all the time. Following a heated argument, it was agreed that he would hunt for work and begin paying the rent as soon as he found one. My wife talked me out of charging him for groceries and other expenses, saying that it would be a bit excessive. In just a few weeks, he had begun applying to jobs and seeking employment, giving the impression that he was very serious about his future. Since he was genuinely taking charge of his own life and stepping up, I believed that things were finally changing for him. I believe I was too fast to assess the situation because he started being rejected from every place he applied. This made sense since he was only applying to high-paying jobs rather than entry-level ones. Despite my slight relief, I now realized that I was overreacting. It goes without saying that no employer would want to recruit someone with his level of inexperience and education. I tried to explain to him that he could start by applying for slightly lower positions like cashier and so on, but he refused to do such foolish and menial tasks, which was absurd because that's the only kind of work that would be trusted to him until he had earned his due. I made an effort to convey to him that he lacked experience. Even his high school grades were not great, and he did not have a college degree. Therefore, he would have to first pay his dues and realize that this was not the time in his life to merely expect everything to be easy. However, he was insistent that he would not accept anything less than what he believed to be his right to work until he was able to find a job that he liked. The restrictions I had laid down said that he would have to pay rent after he obtained a job, and if he didn't find one, then he would never have to pay up. I thought this was simply a cunning ploy for him to avoid working and he could just live with us for free. I was aware of his intentions, so I made the decision to ask a friend of mine to hire my son since I could not bear to see him do nothing at home when he had no intention of attending college. After much negotiation, I persuaded my friend to offer my son a paid internship at his startup. My son was forced to take the offer because it was a respectable starting salary and not a menial one. Just as he stated, after assisting my friend for a few months, he performed well enough to be hired on as a permanent assistant to a higher-ranking employee of the company, and I was glad about this arrangement. It would allow me to keep track of his activities and give him some direction in life, unlike most of the boys in his high school friend group who drifted aimlessly for a few years. Everything was going smoothly, and my friend informed me that although he wasn't the most honest or diligent worker, he was still making a good contribution, so everything was all right. Since they were just starting off, they also lacked the funds to hire a better candidate at that time. My son's duties and workload increased along with the company's growth over time, as did his pay. I saw it as beneficial for him because he would now have to work longer hours and take his work more seriously, in addition to receiving a raise that was quite good then. But he told my wife and me one day, not even a year after his first raise, that he was quitting his job because it was simply too much work for him and he could no longer do this. I thought this was a big thing for him, but he was simply brushing it off, so I had no idea what he was talking about. Naturally, I was furious about it because it seemed as though he was ungrateful for the chances he was receiving, even though I was well aware of how challenging it had been for me to provide them for him. Given his expertise and background, it would have been extremely challenging for him to obtain the kind of work he was looking for on his own, and he was considering resigning now that he was finally making more money and could even afford to buy a flat. My main problem with him had always been that he would simply give up if things were a bit tough, which is no way to live because everything is hard. He would never be able to accomplish anything if he kept going at this rate. Furthermore, he would need to learn to persevere and accept that greater possibilities would not present themselves to him. If he truly wanted to succeed, he would have to put in the effort and prove his worth in order to get what he desired. He needed to develop persistence instead of giving up easily when things got difficult. I was so tired of him and his pathetic justifications that I informed him he would have to move out of our house if he quit his job. He was doing passably, but not well enough even before this. Moreover, the fact that he was 22 at the time made it unacceptable. I believed he was mature enough to understand that he would have to put in more effort if he wanted better prospects, and that I wouldn't always be there to help him get a job. Furthermore, it didn't seem as though he wasn't being paid enough for the kind of labor that was required of him. He was just lazy and didn't love the hard work. He only wanted the money, and that's why he didn't want to do it. Sadly, that's not how the world operates, and you have to put in effort to achieve your goals. However, my son was finding it really hard to accept that, so I told him he could either stay where he was working or move out and pursue his interests, but he would have to abide by my regulations for as long as he was residing under my roof. Furthermore, he had to go to work, so he couldn't just give up. Because he was unwilling to accept the truth and argued that I was being unreasonable and too harsh on him, we got into a really terrible fight that day. However, I believed that in order to keep him out of trouble down the road, this kind of tough love was absolutely essential. Thus, after I gave him the ultimatum and he informed me that he wanted to go, things rapidly got out of hand and we found ourselves in a full-fledged yelling match. I told him that he was being ungrateful and that he needed to organize his thoughts after he accused me of never considering his selfishness. My wife was attempting to temporarily diffuse the situation while we were fighting. However, she became upset when my son became really agitated and began swearing at me. She became enraged and told him that, in light of everything I had done for him, he had no right to speak to me in that manner. She also said that I was correct and that he should learn to persevere rather than give up easily. Things became difficult at that moment when my son turned to his spouse and said something that could not be forgiven. He urged my wife to quiet up and let her speak since she had no idea what she was even talking about, and that she had no right to tell him that he should keep working because she had lived off of my pay her entire life and had never worked a day in her life. My kid spoke the most awful thing he had ever said, and even at that precise time, we both realized how rude and vile his words were on all possible levels. I advised him to apologize to his mother straight away, but he refused to back down, claiming that he thought he was correct and had no misgivings about what he had said. My wife was so upset that she ran to the bedroom where I followed her so her son wouldn't see her cry. I consoled her for a short while before going back outside to speak with my son. To my surprise, he was texting on his phone while sitting on the couch with great casualness as if nothing had happened. His expression showed no signs of regret, and I believe that's what triggered me because I took him by the arm and pulled him off the couch, declaring that I could no longer stand him and that he had crossed a boundary today that he would never be able to undo. He had to leave at that point, and I wouldn't let him return until he had made amends to his mother and regained his composure without uttering a word. He simply returned to his room. He returned a little while later, bringing 2 bags that appeared to be filled to the brim with everything he possessed. Then he left the house without saying anything, not even turning to look back. That was our final encounter with him in person. After that, 6 years went by, and we didn't hear anything from him again. A few days after he had first moved out, he did return, but just to get the few items he had left behind. There was no communication between us after that. My friend told me that a week after our altercation, he had quit by email and had stopped coming to work. Although I appreciate my friend's assistance when I needed it, my wife and I had given up all hope for our son because of what he had done, which was beyond our control. 3 years or so after his departure, after 3 years of not communicating with each other, we learned from a few of our relatives that he was getting married, but neither we nor he expected to invite us. We wished for his marriage to succeed, but we didn't talk to him or get in touch with him. When we found out about his impending fatherhood around a year later, we also didn't get in touch with one another. Although we wanted him to be happy, we weren't going to interfere if he was content to avoid us. As a result, we didn't talk to him for 6 long years after that. My spouse expressed a desire to get in touch with him multiple times, but I informed her that I would not support it and that she might pursue it independently if she so desired. Given that I was unwilling to talk to my son, that was it. Neither she nor she did so. My wife then passed away almost a week ago, and I have been inconsolable ever since. I still feel like she'll stroll through the door at any time and try to make me laugh or say something very clever, so it was pretty unexpected, and I'm not sure how to handle this. However, I'm aware that's not possible right now, and I'm finding it quite difficult to handle this. I never imagined the day would come when I would love and be with a lady like her, and now that I have, I don't know how to live without her. Furthermore, I had no idea the day would arrive so quickly. Even though planning her funeral and everything else has been extremely difficult, I've managed to keep going because I want everything to be exactly as she would have wanted. Even though I've been going through a tremendously tough time, I managed to plan a respectable funeral in order to put it behind me and finally be able to deal with my feelings. Everything was going great yesterday until my son and his family arrived. Though silent, his son and wife had perplexed and dejected looks. However, my kid wasted no time in coming to me, embracing me, and breaking down in tears as soon as he arrived. We ended up holding and crying for nearly 5 minutes because I was crying so much and couldn't stop myself from crying. I also had a bit of a breakdown. He apologized for everything, and I informed him that his mother's funeral was not the right place for him to be keeping resentment towards him and feeling as though nothing that had transpired in the past mattered now that my wife had passed away. My thoughts were limited to just one thing. More than any friends or relatives, I could really use the moral support that only my son could provide. He then expressed regret while crying, and I thought his apology was sincere, but I was clearly being a sentimental fool. He also introduced me to my grandson and daughter-in-law, both of whom were quite kind to me. However, after the eulogies and everything, my kid asked to speak to me privately a few hours later. I gave in to his request since I assumed he would discuss his mother or something less dramatic. He informed me that he had pulled me aside to talk to me about his inheritance and that there was no easy way to bring this up at this time, but he felt compelled to ask because he was in desperate need of some additional money. We later sat down in my office. His mother had just been buried, and already he was discussing the benefits he would receive from her passing. I'm not even kidding when I say this. He continued speaking, stating that he had lately resigned from another job that he had been working for a few months and was now facing financial difficulties. However, he was about to run out of savings and was truly going to launch his own company. However, he lacked the funds to do so and was hoping that if his mother had left him anything, he could use it to finance his own venture. I listened to him attentively as he said that he had been living off his wife's income for the previous few months and that it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to do so because it was so emasculating. At this point, he needed my assistance. Once he had finished his conversation, I urged him to leave my house right away and never to return since he was my wife's worst enemy, and I did not want him to be anywhere close to our home or any other place that she cared about. When I told him that, he appeared shocked and attempted to explain that he was only inquiring about the bequest and that I wasn't under any need to make any plans right away. However, I informed him that I didn't think what he was doing was worth it and that if he didn't leave, I would contact the police and have him removed. However, he got into an argument with me and said that since this was his mother's funeral, he had every right to be present and I couldn't stop him. I was so distraught at my wife's death caused me to erupt into a rage at him. Now that I was finally beginning to believe that my son was acting like a decent human being, I understood that he would never be a good person and that he was a complete failure. I was losing my sanity and did not want to ruin my wife's burial, so we got into a big fight again and called each other every dirty word in the book before I finally kicked him out and asked his wife to leave with their son. In a moment of rage, I decided to phone the lawyer to find out if my wife had left anything to her son. He informed me that she had only given him a little amount of money and some jewelry totaling maybe $25,000. I informed him that I intended to challenge the will in order to ensure that he was not left with anything, as it was evident that he was undeserving. However, I've significantly cooled down now following my brief outburst. Yesterday, I talked to a few family members, and they all informed me that I somewhat overreacted and that I needed to handle it with more composure instead of responding in that way. They assured me that I had every right to be upset with my son because of the utterly repulsive things he did, but because I wanted to teach my son. I didn't want to throw him out like that and then call my lawyer loudly and publicly demanding that we challenge my wife's will. Everything about the situation was overwhelming, and I should definitely think twice about what I want to do with it all. After giving it some thought, I'm not sure if it's the proper course of action. I therefore tried to challenge my wife's will by pushing my son out of the funeral when he brought up his inheritance. When I informed my lawyer that I had decided not to contest the will, he informed me that he had not started the legal process because he anticipated that after I calmed down, I would change my mind. That was a benefit. For the record, my lawyer and I have been friends for a very long time. He also knew my wife fairly well, and my son had attended the burial. Not long after he had gone, they did not cross paths. However, he was the first to learn of my conflict with him and about me from other individuals. He told me that becoming irritated and making snap decisions would not help in the long term, so I should consider everything, maintain my composure, and then decide what I wanted to do. We both agreed that my son's comments from the other day were inappropriate, so I felt compelled to correct him in some way. After much consideration, we came to the conclusion that I would not challenge my wife's will in order to deny him the money and jewelry she had left for him. Even though my wife might have had a soft spot for him despite everything he did, I was going to make sure that I changed my will and left him nothing at all. However, that soft spot is no longer there for me, especially in light of the events of a few days ago. That's something I don't believe I want to forgive, and I doubt I will be able to. Therefore, my attorney and I have decided to amend the will. I haven't done so yet because, against all odds, I had the misguided notion that I would have been able to make amends with my son by the time I passed away. But at this point, it seems more and more unlikely, and I'm not sure I want to make amends with someone like that because I can't even call him my kid anymore. I don't deserve to include a stranger in my will, and he is a stranger to me. Furthermore, I would much prefer to leave my business and all of my money to other people than to my son, who obviously does not appreciate me as his father and never valued his mother when she was alive. The only bright spot in all of this, I suppose, is that my wife was spared the knowledge of what a terrible person our kid had become. She died with the hope that one day he might be able to change for the better. That's the only comfort I can find right now. When my lawyer eventually got in touch with my son, he informed him that although he would get anything his mother had left him, he would not get anything from me until the probate was finished because everything was going to go to other individuals according to the terms of my will. All of the people who had been a part of my life, aside from him, would essentially be receiving something. He would also receive nothing for his little prank at my wife's funeral. The only reason we felt the need to let him know was because I had hoped that knowing would at least prompt him to apologize to us and admit that what he had done was wrong. However, nothing of the kind occurred. Instead, he instructed my attorney to inform me that he didn't really care if he got anything from me or not, since he would much rather be destitute and always be reminded that I had done him a great favor, because even in death, that's precisely what I would want. That, I suppose, is all right now. Update: my wife passed away about 9 months ago, and I'm doing better now. It's been difficult, but I've been in therapy and I'm trying to manage my emotions. That is something I cannot dispute. However, I am aware that life moves on, and I must too. That is what is most important to me right now. Therefore, I have been doing all I know my wife would want me to do and have been doing my best to please her. After my lawyer's final phone call, I haven't spoken to my son, and he hasn't even contacted me to see how I'm doing. However, that was to be expected from him. I've heard from a few people that he was planning to set up his business closer to his wife's house and relocating out of state with the money he received from his mother, so that's probably beneficial for him. I wish him well in life and hope to live long enough to witness his accomplishments. But after this, I don't want to talk to him anymore. Maybe I could consider mending our relationship if he ever gets his act together and apologizes without any hidden agenda, but for now, that seems improbable. Up until that point, all that will sustain me is my recollection of my wife and myself. Though I know she is in a better place now, I still miss her and think about her every day. I believe she is out there somewhere.